You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
There's several ways you can cook. Like you can stir fry with garlic, and if you want a little bit spicy, you can put a little bit chili with shrimp paste. I noticed when I go to a restaurant and find out that it's kind of hush, and they say, well, we're not allowed to sell them. I say, why? What's wrong? Let's do something about this.
For Lê Dong, a Vietnamese American living in Georgia, water spinach is a key part of her culture. Though not as well known as bok choy or Chinese broccoli, this vegetable is a staple in many Asian cuisines, and in Vietnamese cooking in particular. It's also on the USDA's noxious plant list and is considered a plant pest in Georgia. On the surface, water spinach looks like just another leafy green. But beneath its delicate leaves lies a complex tension between cultural preservation and environmental regulation. This tension brings up questions like, how do food traditions evolve in new landscapes? Who gets to decide what is cultivated and what is forbidden? And ultimately, what happens when upholding foodways comes into conflict with the laws of the land? Today we're breaking format and serving you up an audio documentary-style episode. Our producer, Hieu Huynh, takes us to her home state of Georgia, where she's examining how water spinach has become a unifying force for the Vietnamese community, a symbol of resilience, adaptation, and the ongoing negotiation between cultural heritage and the environment. I'm Taylor Early, and this is Meat and 3 on HRN.
Meat and 3.
Meat and 3.
Meat and 3.
One meat, 3 sides.
Food, news, and storytelling.
A square meal. For your ears.
Meat and 3.
Earlier on this season of Meat and 3, we dug into the origins of seeds and the cultural significance of indigenous plants. But a few of us were left wondering if culturally indigenous plants can sustainably take root in new environments. In this bonus offshoot, Hieu digs deeper into the relationship between culture and plants. And in true Meaty fashion, she explores how this relationship acts as a branching off point, connecting to issues of power, identity, and privilege. So what happens when growing the seeds tied to your heritage is illegal? The answer, we discovered, isn't so simple.
I'm at Nam Phuong, a Vietnamese restaurant along Buford Highway in Atlanta, Georgia. On the menu is a classic dish of stir-fried water spinach, or rau muong in Vietnamese. It's similar in taste to watercress, but milder and less bitter. What makes this plant stand out are its hollow shoots. This allows it to float in tropical waters like Vietnam. Coincidentally, similar conditions exist in Georgia, which makes it an ideal place for cultivation, despite not being native to the region. Craving a taste of home, Vietnamese refugees resettling here after the Vietnam War began planting it, taking advantage of the similarities in soil and water conditions, without fully thinking about the consequences of what it would mean to introduce a new species to their adopted homeland. But why would they? As refugees fleeing the aftermath of war, there are bigger priorities to think about. Plus, in Vietnam, water spinach is treated as an everyday plant, not a nuisance. In Vietnam, it grows in lakes and ponds. In America, officials fear that, if left unchecked, it could overtake Georgia's waterways like the Okefenokee Swamp. These concerns aren't entirely unfounded. The plant is notorious for its fast growth and has been documented to grow over 4 inches in one day. Its seeds can spread like wildfire in the wind. In Florida, for example, water spinach has spread in certain areas, disrupting local ecosystems. Across the U.S., non-native species have altered landscapes and biodiversity, sometimes with devastating consequences. To start off, I talked to Dr. Sarah Kibbing, a research director at the Yale School of the Environment. The distinctions between invasive, non-natives, and noxious can be confusing, but the differences between each classification are important.
A non-native species is just a species that's been moved by humans across a geographic area that species wouldn't have moved on its own.
And many of these species are really important to us. But when non-native species become ecologically or environmentally problematic, they become labeled as invasive.
Once it's introduced into this new area, it spreads even further, with or without human assistance, to natural areas or places where humans didn't intend to put it.
As we mentioned earlier, water spinach is classified as a noxious weed. It's a federal designation that's deemed a species problematic.
So a lot of these species are species that you might find in rangeland systems that tend to be bad for cattle or increased fire risks, or in other agricultural settings like cropland settings where you get noxious weeds that cause economic or agricultural damage.
Further complicating this is that states also have their own list of problematic plants, and oftentimes the criteria that state agencies use to determine what is invasive differs across borders. It's also important to note that the classification is situational.
Just because a species is, let's say, non-native across the continental United States, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be invasive in all places.
Among these problematic species is the wild boar, responsible for over $1 billion in damages every year, plus eastern bullfrogs that were moved out west during the gold rush.
We had a lot of French immigrants at the time, and so frog legs were a delicacy that they enjoyed and they liked. And now the eastern bullfrog is considered an invasive species in some areas out west.
It's hard not to question how water spinach ended up grouped with these species that have had such a clear ecological impact. You can't talk about invasive plants in Georgia without mentioning kudzu. Like water spinach, it can grow and spread quickly. But unlike water spinach, kudzu has unwittingly become a part of the southern landscape. Water spinach began raising red flags around the same time as Southeast Asian communities started settling here in the 1970s. As we heard earlier from Lê Dong, Vietnamese refugees began planting it because it's what they're used to eating. Many of them didn't realize it was outlawed, and once they did, water spinach cultivation went underground. I remember my mom buying water spinach out of the trunk of a car when I was young. Determined to make the sale and cultivation of water spinach legal, Lê Dong was at the forefront of the fight starting in 2011. Her efforts laid the groundwork that would gain momentum when State Representative Pedro Marin joined a year later. Since then, they've made many attempts.
In 2016, it's not passed because they say they're afraid that people will take the root and grow them. Or they take it home and they cook and they put in the trash and they will grow and clog the sewer system. That's their excuse, but didn't stop us.
They and other organizers collected over 100,000 signatures in favor of legalization to draw the attention of the Georgia Department of Agriculture to consider their cause. In 2020, they decided it was time to take action again. They and Representative Marin teamed up with the owner of several well-known Asian grocery stores to convince Agricultural Commissioner Gary Black.
We take him to a restaurant, they prepare the ramen so he can see what's going on.
They propose educating the community on how to properly dispose of the roots so it doesn't spread. In 2022, the state legalized the sale and consumption of water spinach, but not its cultivation. While this was a victory for the Vietnamese community, Lê and other advocates continue to push for the right to grow it legally. If successful, Georgia would become the 5th state in the U.S. to allow its cultivation. The other states are California, Texas, Florida, and Hawaii, which all happen to have large Asian populations.
It's a good incentive for Georgia. Instead of we have to go over to another state to buy. Why can we grow them and we use them and we can sell them to somewhere else too? That tax for the state right there, for the money, yeah. But I'm happy at least I can go out and buy rau muống anytime I want now. I don't have to get the black market for it.
Now that we've heard from Lei and Dr. Kibbing on the cultural impact and science, it's clear this isn't just about a plant. It's about identity, belonging, and who gets to decide what foods are welcomed or pushed out. While science may offer guidance on how to contain the spread of a non-native or invasive species and even its impact on biodiversity, there's a limit to what it can solve on its own.
The question of the value of a species or the value of water spinach as a culturally important species for humans living in one area relative to any of these potential impacts that it could have, that's for society to decide. That's for the policymakers to say, what do we value the most? What risks are we willing to tolerate based on what the science tells us? How can we manage and navigate between these tensions?
I agree. This isn't just a scientific or cultural question. It involves a lot of other voices. Next, I spoke with State Representative Marvin Lim, a longtime Atlanta resident originally from the Philippines, who has worked tirelessly to get water spinach legalized.
I first got involved in 2021, which was my first year in office.
For him, the key regulatory and legal challenge was essentially a rule issued by the Georgia Department of Agriculture.
I still wanted to figure out, well, was that inevitable? Was there a way to have water spinach here that would not pose those problems? And that was the key question that we essentially had to deal with, because if we could resolve that, we might be able to reverse the regulation.
He also points out it wasn't like water spinach was being singled out. Regulations often only take into account the risks involved and not the potential benefits, which can be equally important.
The other challenge is that over time, we lose the knowledge, in my opinion, as to why this was adopted in the first place. Assuming that this was banned in the late 70s or anytime in the 80s, it sat for at least 20 years. So as things change, have the conditions changed? And that analysis was not made until we pushed for it in 2021 and 2022.
Still, one fact is hard to ignore.
Once you put something on the invasive species list, it's really hard to overturn science. Conditions would have to be really, really different to reverse a scientific determination. What eventually happened with our efforts, it was also determined that there was a way that we could actually grow it so that it was not necessarily invasive.
While Representative Lim has presented a lot of research from Texas and Florida, it looks like the state is approaching the issue with caution.
Their response initially was to compare and contrast Georgia climate versus Texas and Florida climate, because they're not exactly the same. By presenting that research, I feel that we moved the needle.
As he has said, it's important we revisit issues that were decided on decades ago. Just as the population of Georgia has changed over the last 20 years, so has the environment and the issues that matter to people.
Culture isn't static, and the people here aren't static. It is very, very dynamic. And if you make a static determination about a science, oftentimes you are making essentially a forced assumption about people. But certainly you're ignoring the calls of Vietnamese people if you're not deciding, hey, it's worth it to revisit this issue.
While we still have a long way to go, he is glad of the impact that the partial legalization of water spinach has made so far.
I still get people expressing happiness that they are able to do this. Part of the impact is just openness. Nobody has to be worried anymore that they might get in trouble for possessing it.
My conversation with Representative Lim has shown me that this conversation has bigger implications than water spinach.
And I think in that way, we've set an example for thinking through how we set policies, even outside of agriculture. We can think of a lot of things that are policies that we set that might unintentionally impact more people than others.
Having heard from both academic and policy perspectives, I can't help but feel this interesting interplay happening, a dance of sorts, where science and policy are relying on the other to address the gaps that neither is fully able to tackle on its own. These policies, after all, don't exist in a vacuum. While we can say it's for society to decide, we also need to acknowledge that there's a serious power imbalance and the equitable pathways that may or may not exist. And stuck in the middle is the community that this crop is important to. If society gets to decide, we have to ask ourselves, who gets to make this determination? According to Representative Lim, we're allowing decades-old research to dictate the fate of water spinach, and science needs to catch up with what's happening now. Next, my journey takes me to the University of Georgia's experimental farms, where Timothy Koo Long, a professor of horticulture, was approached by the Department of Agriculture to find novel ways of cultivating water spinach.
Really, our goal is pretty straightforward to grow, and many in the Asian community probably already know how to grow it based on experiences elsewhere. If we are going to allow it, how do we produce it without it getting into the environment?
While new to Dr. Kulong and his team, they have experimented using greenhouses and high tunnel structures, which are essentially unheated greenhouses. He sees a future where water spinach can be produced by small growers around Atlanta and sold directly to Asian markets.
I think now the Asian American population in Atlanta has grown so much in the last 20 years that it now is kind of on the forefront of policymakers and regulators and so forth, and kind of hence the move to say, all right, there's a desire to have this product in the marketplace. Let's see how we can do this the right way.
So far, their findings have been positive. In the controlled testing environment, Dr. Kulong and his team found that water spinach is very productive. It grows similarly to other agricultural crops, getting disease and pests, but it can be grown responsibly.
And so I think it could serve a nice niche for our growers. And it's also a green that's available midsummer when things like collards or kale or any of those other commonly eaten greens it's too hot to grow them.
Who knows? Maybe one day water spinach could become a part of Southern culture and adopted into other foodways. But before that can happen, there's a deeper question to consider. Who gets to shape its future? I keep going back to a tension I can't ignore. On the one side are those who have cultivated this plant for generations. On the other are the institutions that now study it in controlled environments, which can feel removed from its cultural roots. What I've learned is that the most impactful solutions will come at the local level, where communities can have direct conversations and make decisions based on their specific needs. These local nuances can get lost in broader policy making. It's also going to take commitment and long-term planning.
I just think it's always a challenge of guaranteeing that human behavior will continue through the long term. If introducing a new species into a natural area requires monthly monitoring to make sure that that species isn't spreading, how much can you guarantee that there will be a person or a group of people who are willing to take on that effort?
For Lei, the question now is who will continue the fight.
God, I'm too old for this now. I cannot take it anymore. But then something come up, and then the community members say, hey, I need you, help out, reach out doing this.
The fight for food sovereignty feels urgent and immediate. But for the second generation, the stakes feel different. In Georgia, water spinach is legal to sell, but not to plant. In a way, we've won half of the battle, but is that enough? We have access, so what else is there to fight for? Does it really matter who gets to grow our food if we can already buy it, even if we never plant it ourselves? Is planting the next logical step? I do know that over time, immigrants adapt their eating habits to mirror those of native-born people of their same ethnic and racial group. Studies show that differences in cuisines, eating habits tend to fade within 5 to 10 years of one's arrival in the United States. Among Asian Americans, this tendency is especially pronounced. The possibility that an immigrant community's food traditions could disappear within a generation underscores the urgency of preserving them. It's clear that the fate of water spinach cannot be solely determined by science or policy. It's going to require working in collaboration where everyone values both the cultural wisdom of the community and environmental research. It's not just about water spinach. It's about who gets to define the future of our food. Conversations about food always lead me back to my mother. I ask her about the ingredients she misses the most from Vietnam. Like always, she evades my question. I have everything I need here, she says. I've always made do with what we have. But I can't help but ask, aren't you tired of just making do? As I watch my mother cook water spinach, something she could not have legally done until a couple of years ago, I wonder, what would I do in her place? I imagine myself at my mother's age when she first came to America. Overwhelmed and homesick, my palate not yet accustomed to the highly processed, high-fat, high-sugar American diet. What would I eat? How far would I go to find food that not only nourishes me, but also connects me to my roots and my identity? The answers aren't so simple.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. Learn more about the guests and topics we touched on this week by checking out our show notes. This episode of Meat and 3 was reported by Hieu Huynh. Hieu was our lead producer for this episode, with editorial support from the Meat and 3 reporting team. Our executive producers are H. Conley and me, Taylor Early. We also supported Hieu in editing and producing this episode. Our audio engineer is Sam Girardi, and our theme song was composed by Bragmaster Cylinder. This program is supported in part by the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts, as well as public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Meat and 3 is powered by Simplecast. Meat and 3 is a production of Heritage Radio Network, the world's pioneer food radio station. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org and follow us at heritage_radio and at meaty.gram. And please stay in touch. Whether you have a story idea or would just like to say hey, write us at ideas@meatand3.nyc, and that is all spelled out.